Hi, my name is Josh Colby. We're at my studio here at the Elephant Room out in Fairview, Tennessee. And today we're going to go through a mix of my band, The Rifley, and this track's called Believe. So this one, I'm going to dive through the drums first to kind of show you everything I've done on the mixing side. And I'll kind of do, I did track this, so I'll go through everything that I did on the tracking side as well. So here we go. So I'm going to run through the drums first. So that's the general gist of what I got so far. So let's dive in deep on this one. So we'll start with the kick drum. So I kind of like with my drums, I like to do a mix of like samples and live spot mics if the music does call for it. So I'll kind of show what I did on the kick here. So keep it really simple, because sometimes with mixing, you can overcomplicate things and you can go too deep and kind of sometimes almost ruin what you're doing in the mix sometimes. So here's what I did. So here's the live kick. With the EQ, as you notice, you can see on here, I like to use the stock Avid EQ. I think it's great, actually. So this one, it just called for just a boost just under like 5K. I really have no rhyme or reason why I pick certain frequencies I do, because I just use my ears. There really is no right or wrong way with mixing, and you'll hear me say that a lot. And sometimes on kick, just to tame the transients a little bit, just to keep it a little bit more consistent, I will throw compression on it. And I like to use the high pass filter on this just so it triggers everything above a certain threshold, because I really don't want the compressor to trigger any of the low end information. I really want it to trigger the attack of everything. So as you can hear, it's kind of a little flabby. It's exciting. It was tracked okay, moderately well. But sometimes I just need a little bit extra punch with this. So this is when I'll blend in a sample. And I have a pack of some of my favorite samples that I've made over the years. I try to sample the kits that I'm actually tracking, but sometimes there's just some samples that just sound awesome and I just like to run with them. And then here's them together. So a cool plugin I like to use too it's by Joey Sturgis Jones. It's this clip plugin. This thing is a lifesaver on drums. You can really push it, get extra punch with your drums and stuff without it standing too much fire in the mix. So like if I want the kick to sit a little bit hard in the mix without having to push the volume so much where it's just, blowing out the output, I like to use this clipper. And sometimes I'll dial it back, but it just feels like it gives it more volume. So I'll pop engage this in and out with the kick drum. So that's in, here's it out. So you really don't hear like a crazy volume boost in it, but you feel like it just has a lot more energy to it. So this will help it stand out in the mix more without, eating up your headroom. Don't you get over me, 'cause I don't wanna get over. So that's kind of how it's standing, with the chorus and everything with a kick. So let's move on to the snare drum. So snare, same deal. I like to do a mix of samples and the live spot mics just to keep the dynamics and the realism of the drums alive. So here's a live snare. As you can tell, there is some bleed in there and stuff. So I do like to use a gate, but I don't like to use a hard gate, per se. I don't like to gate it super hard because I do want some of that bleed in there because it keeps the realism of it. And also too, sometimes when you do gate a little bit too hard, I feel that, you just lose like the whole sustain of the snare drum and stuff. So just having, a little bit of bleed in there, I think still keeps the realism alive in it. So I'm gonna gauge with the gate off. And here it is with the gate on. So there is some sustain there still. You can hear the gate kind of moving in and out a little bit, but I do think that's why I leave the bleed in there too, because it'll help keep the snare sound realistic and not chopped off. So next thing, obviously, you see I use this distressor a lot. I love it. I've got the hardware right there, track with it all the time. Same deal, it's just basic settings, slower attack, faster release, 4-to-1 ratio, which is my go-to on drums. It just works for me. I love it. And then EQ again. I like to, with snares, I like to boost. I'll try to, use my ears and find this, but anywhere around between 100 to 200 hertz, I like to give it a little boost just to it gives a little bit of body to the snare drum. And then I'll cut too to kind of get the ring out, or if there's any like flappiness, low mid flappiness. My terminology doesn't make sense sometimes, but to my ears, that's just what I hear. Cut that out, and then I have a little crack and a little bit of top into it. This, I can't live without this plug. It is awesome. This really can help shape what a drum can do. If you want it to be, faster, punchier drums, pull the sustain back. If you want it to have a lot of ring, like a bigger, fatter sounding snare, I'll push the sustain out. It just makes it sound bigger sometimes too. So I'll let that run again. And same thing, using the Joyster, just clipper. This thing's awesome. Okay, so we'll move on to the samples that I use. So with samples, I have to use two different kinds. I like to use one that's kind of like a higher, like a snappier crack kind of thing. And then I like one that's gonna add a little bit more body to the snare too. So then I'll blend those two together. So kind of show you the sample. And this is one of my go-to samples. I love this one, use it on a lot of stuff, if it fits the kit. And then same deal, pretty much the same, across all my snares. I pretty much use the same signal path. Like I said, it's to taste. Like this one, I know this sample, I love to boost, a ton of 100 hertz on this sample. And then same with the Transient Designer. Love this thing because I can shape it too. If I want it to have a lot more sustain, a bigger sounding snare, or if I want it to be really snappy, quick, just pull the sustain back. But I'm telling you, this Transient Designer is a lifesaver. And then my third snare I usually do is like something that's got a lower, like a lot of punch, something that has a lot of, sometimes almost ring to it, a lot of sustain. So you can see on its own, it does not sound all that great, but when you blend it in, it really helps like shape the drums. So let me put all three together. So it just kind of just gives it that body. But when I'm, getting sounds with the snare drums too, and even the kicker, everything, I try to fit it with how it's gonna sound with the rims and the overheads too. So sometimes the spots may sound a little kind of unnatural sometimes, but when you bring them with the room mics, that's what kind of brings them to life too, because I really want that first part of that stick. That's what I'm really focusing on in my spot mics. I'm not too worried about what's kind of going on around it and stuff, because I use my room mics for that. I'm gonna shut the room and overheads off just so you kind of hear what I was saying about, how the room really defines how these spots are gonna sound. So we'll go on to the overheads and rooms later on too, and I'll kind of show you how it all ties together. So next is just the toms. Like I said, I just like them super punchy. So same deal. You said that you hear like a lot of the stick attack. Obviously they're samples. I love sampling toms. I just feel like I have more control over them. Sometimes gates can get, to me at least, gates can not really perform accurately enough. So samples, as long as they sound good, they fit the track, I'm gonna run with them. And here, same deal. Just these are my favorite EQ curves on, these specific samples. Sometimes I'll compress them a little bit too, just to control them. But that means samples, a lot of them, they're really consistent. So, and then again, Joyster, just clipper, love this thing. So let's room onto the overheads and the rooms. I said this one I did track here in my studio. So I kind of you'll see I keep a really minimalist setup on my drums because it is a smaller room. So I'm gonna show you some tricks too that I use to kind of make the drums sound a lot larger than they really are when you see the room. So this is my overheads. So what I like to do with my overheads, and this is all sound dependent, drum dependent, kind of how it's happening in specific rooms. I do like to roll off quite a bit because sometimes I feel like when you get like the kick drum and their overheads, it can clash with it a little bit. I've run into phase issues at times, and I just think it makes the kick stand out a little bit more, to me at least. So, and that's literally all I do for my overheads. That's it, I leave them as is. I want to keep them just sounding how they are, according to what the drummer did. So the next one is a room mic. So this is one of my favorite tricks to do. in my drum room at least, and I'll do this at other studios too, is I will literally just put a mono drum room up. So you can tell that the drum room, it wasn't very like big sounding. It's, it's not a very large room. So what I'll do is I'll convert like the track to like a mono to stereo, and I'll pop, deverb in this to make it like a stereo, feel for the room. So by doing this, it kind of makes your room come to life. And with this too, is that you can really, with just this, using this one mic, doing this trick, you can really define how big you want the drums to sound. So if you want the drums to sound larger, push this up and then just dial in the mix, boost the decay. If you want it smaller, smaller sounding, drop the decay down. So I'll show you some trick. I'll start playing with it so you can kind of hear what it does in the mix. As you can see, you can make the drum room sound like tighter, just a little bit of ambience. You can make it sound like it's in a big giant garage or warehouse, or something like that. So it's really cool, a quick, easy trick you can do to really define how big you want your drums to sound. And I'll treat this, so after I do that, I'll treat this as if I'm how I would typically do a room, distressor again, nuke mode. I mean, this is how I would do a room if I were in a huge space. So that's pretty much it. So that's one of my little drum tricks I've been using for years. It's awesome. I mean, play with it. I'm sure there's so much you can do with it. So lastly, we're gonna go to my buses. So everything I like to do, as you can see on here, I like to bus everything out to something because I feel like it gives you a little bit more control over it. It's kind of like almost, it's submixing all your tracks and stuff. So when you get to the master, your master's you just kind of set it and forget it kind of thing. So on my drum bus, I keep it really simple. SSL, compressor, I just have it going a couple dBs really. So a couple dBs just to control its transients on the top a little bit. I don't want to over compress too, because sometimes I feel like it can, just suck the life of the drums. You get the snap, but you just won't, the bodies just sometimes can just be gone. Like, I'll show you an example. Like, tightens it up, but it still leaves everything that the drums are doing. And I also like to use a filter after about 80 hertz because I really don't want this to trigger any of the low-end kick information or anything too. So, and then I'll either use Studer or Oxide. Lately, I've been using Oxide a lot. Honestly, I'm really liking it. Just do this just to add a little bit of tape saturation. And to me, it almost feels like it kind of compresses a little bit too, in like a natural way. And then again, lastly, Joy Sturgis Clipper. Again, this track I didn't do too much to it. Kind of use this as just like the last, like a safety net. Instead of using a limiter, I'll use this just to kind of catch any transients just so they don't pop over. And then so next, what I'll do is a parallel drum comp. So this one, I will only send the spot mics to it because I don't want any like the cymbals, the overheads to go to it, because sometimes it'll get too like whooshy or something like that. So I just want the spot mics in there just so I can kind of control how much. And this one I'll crush too. So I'm gonna engage it off. So it just adds a little bit more body to it, a little bit more punch and stuff without, it being so audible. Just blending it in there, It's like a perfect touch to it. And then lastly, I just have a snare verb one. Sometimes I'll throw, because I like to keep the verbs pretty consistent. I don't like to use too many of them because I think it can cause issues in a mix, but that's just me. So I'll just throw verb on the snare just for a little bit extra. And I like to use the EMT 140 by UAD. Love this thing. What it does is it kind of too, I like to put this one on the live snare too, because it'll kind of give it a little bit more life to it. And that's really drums. That is everything I do. I keep it really, really simple, honestly. I just use my ears. I think how I'd be working on a console in a way, and just keep it simple. Kind of use what I've got to work with and run with it. So I'll play the drums in the mix quick so you can hear them. So that's the drums for you. So moving on, we'll go out into guitars. And you'll see I keep it super simple. And with guitars, I like to do a lot of top-down mixing for them. Unless it's needed, I don't do anything to the individual tracks. I kind of leave them as is. And I just kind of control it globally because I want them all to be consistent sounding, especially if they're tracked well. Then you can kind of get away with this. Pretty much on this one, from what I remember, I used, when I checked the guitars, was just a Marshall DSL 50 is what I got over there, yeah. And then I used it into a UA aux. It's awesome. So the biggest thing with guitars too for me is just like balance and kind of finding their place in the mix. So I tend to do a lot of like LRC mixing, as you can see in here. There's some stuff that I might do, but like in the intro, like this stereo guitar, I just felt it sounded good there, so I ran with it. But typically I like LRC, just left, center, right. You know where everything is in the mix. You know stuff's gonna be the left, center, or right. You're not gonna know something's gonna be at 10 o'clock or 2 o'clock. That's just me. It works well for me. I know some people that do crazy panning stuff, and it's awesome. But this works for me, and I run with it. So pretty much everything super simple on the guitars. They didn't need too much. Just made sure they were tracked well to begin with. Just a little boost, 1.5K, just to kind of make them stand out, give it that kind of like perceived volume. There was a little gunk here, cut that out, and then I rolled them off right about 100 hertz just to make space for the low end information. And then lastly, I love using a tape plug, especially this backside or the Studer, whatever I end up going with, on the guitar, just to give it a little bit of saturation that's really like harmonically pleasing. So that's really guitars, super simple. Like I said, biggest thing, track them well, then this can happen. So you won't have to do too much to them. So next one is bass. So this one, I remember doing this one. I had a little troubles with the bass, but I'm gonna show you kind of what I did to kind of help, fix it and deviate from the issues I was running into, so. With the bass guitar, I typically like to have two different bass tracks. So one of them, I like to carry like the lower end information. The other one I like to carry like a lot of the punch. Sometimes I add like a Sans amp on it if the song calls for it. And this gives you a little bit of control to be able to boost if you want more low end, but you don't want to boost the top end, of the snap with like the bass guitar or anything like that. You just do this and it gives you a little bit more body to everything. With the bass guitar too, I keep it really simple. I like if I go direct in, I swear by this. That's what I use probably 90% of the time on my bass guitar tracks. And I'll just use 1176 just to tame it down a little bit, and then I'll bust them out too. So here, this is what I like to do a lot too. I'll actually put an L1 right at the front of it, because then it gives me like a even playing field for when I do on the bass bus, when I kind of combine the two together. So not too much, just enough to kind of tame down any peaks that may come through or anything. And then I'll do like a global control, what it calls for. So this one I heard the fundamental frequency roughly around, it was like, in this range, 1 to 110. So I want to boost it out there so you can kind of hear the note. This is an important one too, with the bass and the kick. You kind of want to choose, for the most part, which one you want to live in the sub-frequency range. So most of the time I end up going with the kick to kind of live in the sub-frequency range, because I feel like sometimes with the bass guitar, it can kind of not sound tight. It can like flub out, make the mix feel flubby and not so tight and like punchy. So most of the time, 40 to 50 hertz roughly. It just depends. Just use your ears, kind of see what, what the track's doing, the song's doing, kind of go from there. And then again, tape plug-in. You see, I love this thing. So as again, when I bypass it and turn it back on, it kind of smooth it out a little bit more too, without having to use compression. Just like a natural, like to me, like tape plugins, this is just me, every mixing engineer is different. I like to use them as like a natural way of compression. So that's a bass guitar, so we'll put that in the mix again. Cool, so that's the bass. So lastly, vocals. One of the most important parts. Make sure you get these right. To me, vocals and drums are probably the most important parts of a mix to my, to me at least. Because if the drums don't punch, they don't sound great, it sometimes feels like it'll throw off the whole track. Same with vocals. If vocals aren't dialed in, not sitting well in the mix, it could really turn off a listener. So to me, these two things are the most important parts. That's why I keep them right next to each other in my templates, because I want them to kind of play off each other.
Tell me all your secrets only if you want for me to know every little thing, to know every little thing about you.
I'll do a kind of a run through what I do on my vocals. And as you can see, I don't do a whole heck of a lot. Just honestly just doing some cutting, cleaning it up. And usually when you do that, they'll start shaping by them, on themselves. So vocals roll off roughly about 100 hertz, just what it called for. And sometimes by doing this too, I try not to boost as much either. There's areas that it calls for it, it does need it, but I try to cut more than anything, because when you cut, like say here, like I rolled off 100 hertz, it just made the vocals feel like they sat on top of the mix more just by rolling it off. Saw a little, heard a little nastiness here at about, I think it was like, what does it say? Yeah, 385 hertz roughly. So I just cut it out, used my ears, find out where it was gross, cut it. And then this is one of my favorite EQs. I use this all the time, literally for this right here. So I like to use it on the 20 kilohertz. I'll boost to taste wherever it needs it. And I just feel like it just adds a little bit of lift within a mix. Sometimes I'll cut if I need to, like here, I roll off a little 650 hertz because I felt like it, it just sounded like it needed a little 2.5 kilohertz just to give it a little kind of cut a little bit, but not too much. And then lastly, love this plugin, Joey Sturgis plugs again. Love this thing. It just makes everything just sit right in front of your face.
Tell me all your secrets only if you want for me.
One thing is too, you do got to be careful with it too if you really want to get aggressive with it, because it does bring out, if you did track in a noisy room or anything. So like with the vocals, I went and I just chopped them up really nice, cut them in and out, cut the gunk out, anything that does dead space that just doesn't need to be there. Okay, so I'll go through what I did on that chorus vocals there too.
Don't you get over me, 'cause I don't wanna get over you. Nothing about this is easy.
So one thing I'm gonna do is, like I said, to keep everything consistent, because I like consistency throughout my mixes. So I don't really, whenever I process like one vocal, I try to just like duplicate that to the rest, just so it keeps everything consistent. It just feels a little bit more natural. Like I said, it's like working on a console. You've got same EQs across the board, using whatever hardware you've got to insert in. Just keeps it consistent, makes it feel right. So this one, I didn't have any additional harmonies on this one. This is a cool little trick I'll do. So actually using this plugin, Nectar by Isotope, I'll put it, in the key. This harmony generator is actually really, really good, and it works quite well if you don't want to pull out Melodyne and try to build your own harmonies. And like I said, the vocal take's got to be a good vocal take to do this. So what I'll do is I'll duplicate the parts where I would like to, where I want to add the harmony at. So it's these ones right here.
This is easy. You find someone and no one else will do.
Here's it by itself, and of course it's a fake harmony, so it's going to sound a little wonky here and there.
And nothing but this is easy. You find someone and no one else will do.
So some tricks that I do to kind of offset it to sound so goofy. I'll put a delay on it, but I'll do a really, really short delay. So kind of, it gives it the feeling, you're kind of almost kind of throwing them out of phase. So it gives it the perception when you hear it in your headphones, it just sounds like two, like perfectly taken, vocal harmonies, your left and right ears. So I'll do that to kind of give it a little bit more life and make it sound a little bigger.
And nothing but this is easy. You find someone and no one else will do.
So I'll show it with the chorus vocals.
And nothing but this is easy. You find someone and no one else will do.
And you do want to tuck it in there too, because like I said, it does sound a little, not so natural per se. So you tuck it in there, it just blends in nice. Once you put the music in, you don't hear all the oddities that come with it.
And nothing but this is easy. You find someone and no one else will do. And nothing but this is easy. You find someone and no one else will do.
So that's my little harmony trick when you don't want to pull out Melodyne and start diving deep into that. So next is my vocal bus. Like I said, I like to put everything to a bus. I feel like I like to individually kind of mix each group, and then it just kind of lets your master kind of do its thing. You kind of set it, forget it. Then when you do get to your master, you really don't have to do too much to it. So here, I use this Joy Sturgis vocals bus compressor. It's awesome. Just holds the vocals like right tight in your mix. You don't have to do too much compression with it for it to really sound like it's really, letting them sit on top of your mix.
And nothing but this is easy. You find someone and no one else will do. And nothing but this is easy.
And lastly, L1, just to kind of let it sit on top of the mix. This section called for it. I needed to stand a little bit more. Didn't want to kill too much of my headroom, so a couple dBs of threshold. Put it down, it sat perfect. This one. So that's literally usually what I do on my vocal bus. It's not a whole lot. I tried my best not to overprocess. I've done it before. Someone can destroy a mix. So next, my effects. Usually I always have a verb and some kind of delay running. Let's see, I'll either use this, or sometimes I use like Capital Chambers by UAD. This one I just felt like the Avid deverb on church settings sounded great, so I ran with it.
And nothing but this is easy. You find someone and no one else will do. And nothing.
So what I like to do with my verbs too on vocals, I like to put the pre-delay a little bit too, because sometimes if you leave this down, if you have the pre-delay at 0, sometimes it's like the verb starts when the vocal hits, so they kind of blend too much together. So I would like to, add a little pre-delay on it, just so you hear the actual like physical transient of the vocal hit first, and then you hear the verb on the background. So it doesn't make it sound cheesy when you have too much verb, because sometimes the verb can sound a little bit cheesy when you have the verb start right when the transient hits.
And nothing but this is easy. You find someone and no one else will do.
And sometimes with verbs, I like to do this. I'll add a little compression after, just to keep the tail of it kind of still floating, because I like to use reverbs as a way to kind of fill in space too. So when you use, compress it a little bit, you can keep the sustain in there to kind of float it over a little bit. And then I'll roll off anything that needs to, like, sometimes I'll roll off top end if I need to, just so you don't hear like that kind of sound to it with sometimes reverbs can do. And then funny enough, when I use one of my favorite verbs to use on vocals is actually Amplitude's digital delay. I love this thing. It just works. It does exactly what I need it to do. Just turn off all the amps and such. Love this thing.
And nothing but this is easy. You find someone and no one else will do. And nothing but this is easy. You find someone. one else will do. Nothing about this is easy. You'll find someone and no one else will do.
So that's literally all I do on my vocals. Super simple. Try to do as minimal as possible just to keep me from doing way too much. And you can see too, like the session, it's not very big. I like to keep them as small as possible. I'll ditch tracks like the drums. There was a hi-hat, there was a ride, there was a kick out that I had on there. A couple other ones, didn't end up using them. They just didn't really do anything for me in the mix. You know, so simple, the better to me, honestly. Okay, so with all that done, literally on my mix bus, and this changes from time to time, but I usually have this or I use FabFilter, either or, just to kind of roll off. I'll roll off like this one. I felt like rolling off about 36 roughly hertz, just what I heard with my ears, was fine. I mean, there's information on there I really just did not need, and that'll just eat your headroom up on your master. And I'll use this too, just kind of pull back the output a little bit, just so I don't have to worry about, just so I can mix how I want to do it and use my ears, because I try to not look at meters too much, and if something's hitting red but it sounds good, I'll still keep running with it. As long as it's not audibly distorting anything or hurting anything, and it sounds great, I'll keep using it. So on my master, I'll typically either use this.
Nothing about this is easy. You'll find someone and no one else will do.
And I'll do just a couple dB of gain reduction. And what I like to do too with this is I'll actually, before I start mixing, I'll put this right on my master because I like to mix into it. When I'm mixing, I almost want to hear how the final result's going to be at the end of the session. Like when it's going to be, you know, later on mastered or anything like that. Kind of want to hear how it's going to sound because sometimes it can change, you know, in my opinion. So I just mix into it. It keeps me under control from going overboard with levels or anything like that. So I'll sometimes either use this or I'll use some of my outboard. I have an IGS S-type hardware compressor I'll use here and there. If I feel like a hardware, you know, SSL style is the way to go with it. But this one, I just kept it in the box, used this guy, and it did what I needed.
Nothing about this is easy. You'll find someone and no one else will do. Tell me how.
So that's pretty much everything I do. Like I said, everything can change. There's no right or wrong way to do anything. So one thing I will say though, kind of with like mix prep stuff, I do think it's really, really important to get a good solid template down. So with my templates, honestly, I keep it with the tracks here with my favorite kick, snare, tom, overhead, room, plugin selections, and vocals. I'll keep, you know, these tracks here, and I'll just drag and drop, you know, vocals as needed from, you know, from the stems that I get, and I'll add tracks as needed and such. But once you drag them in, you kind of already get, it already kind of pre-mixes it for you. Just start leveling out, clean up any of this if you need to, and kind of go from there. But end of the day with mixing, there is no right or wrong way to do anything. If it sounds good, just run with it. Like I've done stuff that makes absolutely no sense at all, but it just worked. I just kept going with it. Well, thank you so much for listening on this, and I hope any of this information was really helpful. I know mixing can get, you know, tricky at times, and there's just so much ways you can do things. So again, this track was by my band, The Rightfully, and it's called Believe, and we should be releasing it very soon. So this is a cool little sneak peek of it.
Don't you get over